We're going to Ben and I talked, and we're gonna do this list as a little bit of a Q&A with one another, and then if you have questions during our conversation, if you drop them in the chat, and we're going to have time at the end to have Ben answer some of those questions that might be sparked in you following our conversation. So, Ben, let's just get down to it. What is Jewish pride? That's what your book is about. So, why don't you tell us what about Jewish pride is?
So Jewish pride is three main things. So the first is rejecting the shame of anti-Jewish racism. So the reason, firstly, why I'm saying anti-Jewish racism is because in Europe, where I'm from, in the UK, anti-Semitism is recognized to be a form of racism. So because of the origins of the word anti-Semitism, there's a few of us now starting to call it other things: Jew hatred, anti-Jewish racism, but really it means the same thing. But really, this first point is about rejecting shame. Now, we as a community, we are very good at commemorating our past. We mourn our dead, obviously, but we're not actually very good, I don't think, at talking about the psychological impact that all of the hate we experience and have experienced has on us. So this is about recognizing the shame that is imposed on us, but building a wall so that we don't become ashamed. So that pride is an inoculation really against the shame. So we recognize it and we reject it. We're not going to be ashamed of our Jewishness. We're not going to allow the non-Jewish world to shame us. Secondly, it's about rejecting non-Jewish definitions of what it means to be a Jew. So a perfect example of this was the BBC in March, and they had a panel discussion on their Politics Live programme, and the question that rolled across the bottom was, should Jews count as an ethnic minority? Now, that is just so inappropriate in so many levels. Firstly, the fact that they had 5 non-Jewish people debating Jewish identity. They had one Jewish person come in, and he is a gay Jew, actually, who runs a newspaper called Pink News, Ben Cohen, and he said afterwards he felt very uncomfortable. And the fact that they even think that they're allowed to debate our identity. It's okay if they don't know. It's okay if they had one misconception or preconception of Jewish identity, but that wasn't actually accurate. But to debate who we are is really totally inappropriate. And the last thing is really an exploration. It's a deep dive into Jewish experience, Jewish history, and Jewish values, because there are people out there who claim to be proud Jews, but I would argue actually are not as familiar as they should be with Jewish concepts like Zionism. So it's really those three things, and it's really just about self-love as a community, as an individual, and always seeing our Jewishness as a source of pride and never shame.
So, tell us more about, like, is that why you wrote Jewish and Proud? Why did you write Jewish and Proud? I mean, those are kind of self-obvious, not to be, at least
Yeah,
to me, to be like informed about our history, like to know who you are as a Jew, right? Like, so why did
sure.
you write this?
But you're a rabbi, so this is your job, your world, your life. And I think actually that we as a people have failed post-Holocaust to educate properly. And I don't, and that can come across less with judgment, and it's not meant to. You see these patterns after catastrophe. You see the generation following the catastrophe shrink inwards, kind of suppress this aspect of themselves. So I think that's what we saw happen. A lot of our education focused on the Holocaust, it focused on biblical Israel, but that is not the whole story. There's so much more to us, both good and bad. And the reason I wrote it is because I joined Twitter in 2018 to join the fight against Jeremy Corbyn, who was the former leader of the British Labour Party, who is a disgusting racist. And I call him these things online, and I'm just waiting for him to try and sue me. Um, but he was awful, and he really shook the British Jewish community to our core, because we believed very firmly that we were fine. We said, we're fine, we're okay. We pledge our loyalty every Shabbat to the Queen. We say a prayer for the royal family. At the bar mitzvahs and the weddings, we're good. We've made all the effort to integrate. And actually what we realized that this was not necessarily as reciprocal as we wanted or we thought. Saying that, though, we did see the British Jewish community be a beacon of Jewish pride. They came together. You had Reform, Orthodox, liberal rabbis coming together to sign letters, which I'm sure all of us understand just how kind of monumental that was. And when we had Jewish people from different denominations coming together, it was pretty remarkable. And we stood up for ourselves. But I also saw specific often high profile, often left-wing Jews unable to say, call it for what it was. And they were suffering from what I call the hangover of the keep your head down policy. So this was the unofficial policy of the Jewish world, especially when I was young, that was just keep your head down. Get on with it, don't say anything. That's not pride. That's not proud. That's kind of humiliating, actually. We shouldn't be keeping our heads down. We should be raising our voices. We should be coming together, and we should be protesting at how we have been treated and how we are continuing to be treated. So I guess that, and then reflecting on my own LGBTQ plus pride story, really just, it was like a light bulb moment that I was like, we need this. We need people, we need to build a movement that gives all of us the permission to be proud, because I think that we do need permission, not inherently, but actually we need it because we're constantly told who we are, we're constantly told to keep our heads down, and we're constantly shamed by the non-Jewish world. So this is just a huge kind of, you know, middle finger up at that, and it's really about, you know...
Wait. Somebody's getting feedback. Somebody's, okay, there we go. Sorry, Ben. I just wanted to get it recorded in.
So it's really just rejection of shame. And you know, I'm the author of Jewish Pride, and I stayed in a relationship with someone who was racist against Jewish people. I have, you know, braced for impact when I told people that I'm Jewish, and I didn't want to do that anymore. We have nothing to be proud of. We are each part of this 5,000-year-old history, and how can we think that we're going to be able to pass it on and ensure it continues in the future if we, as a collective, not necessarily individually, but as a collective, are dealing with shame without even addressing it and recognizing it?
That's really powerful. Tell us for us Americans that might not know, tell us what the rest of the story about Corbyn. What happened?
So Corbyn came to power, or he came to power as leader. He was never actually prime minister, but he came to power as leader in 2015. And the British Jewish community was worried about him from the get-go. You know, he is someone who had referred to Hamas and Hezbollah as his friends, and he had been, you know, fraternizing with people who were Holocaust deniers and who were very, very kind of shifty, shady characters. And the British Jewish newspaper, the Jewish Chronicle, did a headline being like, questions that Jeremy Corbyn must answer. And this was really the start of this 5-year process where he would just fudge the issue. And he was not solely the cause. He was both a cause and a symptom of left-wing anti-Jewish hate. But what he did in Britain, and globally, I think, actually, was that he normalized it. What I experience now in the UK, if I'm there on Twitter, is not what it was like 15 years ago. The things that people are saying are not what they were saying 15 years ago. They are so much more emboldened. I have a website, and I got a message through yesterday. Whenever you get a contact message, I get an email, and it simply said gas. And then I'm going to use a slur here, kike. And that is not the situation it would have been 15 years ago. And of course, there were people who thought these things and who said these things, but it has moved into the mainstream. And people who are kind of, you know, sensible left-wing progressive people. So progressive in the UK means kind of soft left. They were supporting Corbyn, and they were, you know, starting to espouse some of the rhetoric that he espoused. And it was a 5-year process to really get him removed. And he resigned because they lost the election. But in the 2019 election where he stood, 10 million British people still voted for him. That was 4 years after he became leader. And we were just, you know, I think that the word the kids say today is shook. Maybe it's not actually what they're saying, but they said that a couple of years ago. We were really shook. We were just absolutely astonished that how could this happen in Britain? Because we, I've got to be honest, we kind of drank the Kool-Aid. We thought that our European cousins, they were the ones that had it bad. The French had it bad. And we knew that there was problems on campus and there was problems in the left, but we never thought it would get to where it eventually ended up. And this is one of the reasons I think we connected, rabbis, because British Jews were screaming to Americans, wake up. Yes. Because this is not a British problem, it's a global problem, and this is coming for you, and it's coming for everywhere. And it's really, really, it's appalling, and it's in some ways quite astonishing, but we have to get over our shock and begin fighting back. and I'm a big Harry Potter fan. You can probably see the books there. And I realized I use Harry Potter a lot in my teaching. And I realized that, we're a very small group of people who are fighting this. And we're constantly being told it's not a problem. It doesn't exist on the left. It's just the right. And it made me realize that we're the Order of the Phoenix, that we are fighting this enormous propaganda campaign. And that's what it is, because the left, and I know I use the left kind of monolithically, and we also know that there are many people on the left who are not anti-Jewish. And of course, it's a diverse group. But anti-Jewishness is now a problem on the left as much as it's a problem on the right. And it's very, as LGBTQ plus Jews or allies to LGBTQ plus Jews, it's very frightening, because many of us are reporting now that we just don't feel safe in LGBTQ plus spaces. I don't. I will not go to a kind of mainstream LGBTQ plus space unless it's Jewish specifically. I'm just not interested anymore, because this is what's happened. And Corbyn was a huge part of the normalization of saying things like, Israel's the worst country in the world. But it wasn't just that, because infamously, he was in a press conference and there was a Jewish Zionist there. And he said, someone had made a joke and the Zionist had heckled him. And he said that, the Zionist, though he lived in Britain for a very long time, did not understand British irony. And it was this very classic upper class British anti-Jewish racism, which said, you're foreigners. You might be born here, you might have lived here for a very long time, but you're not British. And so actually what that shows us, it isn't just a problem on the left. This is a global problem. And Rabbi, what the first line of my book is. And it's not about being alarmist, it's not about being hysterical, it's about waking up to the threat that we are facing and have faced for thousands of years.
And I think you put it really strongly, and I think it's been eye-opening for a lot of us who have been on the left here in the United States to increasingly see what we had seen here previously from the far right, which is the attacks on the Pittsburgh synagogue, on close to us in Southern California. Those people that made those physical attacks and violence typically were on the far right, in a far right, extreme right out here in America. And really, we've really seen, as you said here too, an emboldening, and particularly these last few months as Israel had another round of engagement with Hamas on the southern border at Gaza. We really have seen that. And just recently, this Pride Month, the Chicago Dyke March, which happened a couple years ago, where they excluded specifically Jews from marching with a Jewish pride flag, right? The rainbow flag with a Jewish star in the middle. They did it again just this last week. So I think there's something to be said for us thinking about not just the violent anti-Semitism on the right and how it expresses itself, the neo-Nazis, the Klan in America, and those kinds of things, but also to be awakened by the experience that you and other British Jews had on the left. Now, thankfully, you were able to get rid of Corbyn. That remains still an open question, I think, in the United States, of how to neutralize and isolate those. Any suggestions that you want to make to your fellow American Jews here that you're talking to tonight? So how do we neutralize that?
We have to not stop talking about it. Because actually Corbyn he's gone, but the problems still remain, and the problems that he created in society are still there. But they wanted us to shut up. And I remember being in a gym in London, and they were playing the news, and they were described it as a row. Now, whenever I say the word row to Americans, they have absolutely no idea what I'm talking about. So it's a row. So it's like a quarrel. And they were describing it as a quarrel. And I remember working out and just feeling incensed. I was like, this is not a quarrel. We're a tiny ethno-religious community of 300,000, and we are being actively targeted. It was racism. We were being targeted by the very center of British political life, and they wanted us to shut up. Because actually there were maybe policies that he was proposing that were deemed to be kind of good or positive with regards to social welfare, and the Tories, the Conservatives, are very unpopular, and people wanted us to shut up, and we just didn't. And I think it's about recognizing the threat, and recognizing the threat on the left does not make you not left. It doesn't make you not progressive. It doesn't stop you believing in kind of progressive values like pro-LGBTQ+, pro-women, pro-minorities. Just because you call it out in your own garden, your own home, doesn't mean that you're suddenly on the right, which is what people like to say. You know, the smearing of Jewish advocates who specifically call it out on the left as right wing and as fascist is just absurd. But we have to A, recognize the threat, and B, do not stop talking about it, because we are an uncomfortable truth. Whether it's Ilhan Omar, Rashida Tlaib, or AOC, there are many people who would like us to shut up so they could be supported, because, you know, they're this bulwark against Trump or a bulwark against the right, or they might be proposing other policies which are deemed to be positive. But it doesn't, you know, one good thing doesn't erase the fact that they're endangering people. And I think also we have to come together. And, you know, this is quite hard for Jewish people, right? Because they say you have 3 Jews around a table and you've got 15 opinions. And you see that on Jewish Twitter. It's very much true. And there's something really beautiful about that, but we have to set aside our differences. And we saw it in the UK, Reform rabbis standing with Orthodox rabbis, standing with the chief rabbi, who is Orthodox, as we discussed before, Rabbi. You know, we have to do this. And you know, actually, yes, as LGBTQ plus Jews, we might have issues with certain parts of our community, which is absolutely justifiable and understandable, but we're facing an existential threat. And that is really what people realized about Corbyn, was that he threatens the very existence of British Jewish life. And this is happening all over the world, and it's happening in America. And so recognize the threat, don't stop talking about it, and come together, because it's not that we necessarily will be able to stop it. You know, you have a question later on that I might just pop in here about it. No, anti-Jewish racism is not our problem. It's a problem which affects us. So yes, then it kind of becomes our problem. But the source of the problem isn't ours. So really the people who are going to really be able to combat it are non-Jewish people. It's the non-Jewish world. But the way we get them to do that is by not stop talking about it.
So just take us into this, because this notion that anti-Semitism isn't a Jewish problem, it's a radical statement, Ben. It's a radical statement. I think most of us approach it that it is a problem that we have to deal with, right? We have to deal with the consequences, certainly, of anti-Semitism. We're going to have to clean the graffiti off the shul. But tell me, talk more about what you mean when you say anti-Semitism isn't a Jewish problem, and that our non-Jewish allies have to really be the ones to come forward.
Sure, and I guess it is a radical statement, but actually I think it makes perfect sense. And I'm going to talk about how I came to that idea. So when I was a teen, a late teen, early 20s, I was very much struggling with my sexual orientation. I had kind of in some ways an easy coming out experience with regards to how I was treated and received, but my own mental health was just really rock bottom. And I had really struggled for quite a few years, and I was at rock bottom, and I realized that I had done nothing wrong. Like I was being punished for something that was not actually a crime. This is the way I was born. It was the way it was, and it was beautiful. And it wasn't my problem. This was not my problem to deal with. It was a problem, as you say, we have to deal with the consequences of it, but I had done nothing wrong. And it's the same for us. We have been, you know, colonized and murdered and everything, all of the bad things that can happen to a group of people have happened to us for thousands of years. And, you know, each of us, we're the descendants, either through joining our community or through actual ancestry of Jews who have survived multiple genocides, ethnic cleansings, enslavements, legal segregations. And we've done nothing wrong to be treated in this way. We are just a people who are indigenous to the Levant, and history happened and we were expelled, and then we tried to find safety in other places, and that basically didn't really work, and we were just going and going and going and going, and we did nothing wrong to receive that treatment. And I think it's fundamental for our self-esteem as a collective to understand that this is not our problem. This is a problem that does affect us. We're not going to live in a fantasy land and be like putting our fingers in our ears and being like, no, it's not an issue. Of course it's an issue. I told my widowed mother during the last war, I was like, maybe just don't wear your Mogen David. Of course it's our issue. Of course it impacts us, but it's not our fault. It's not our problem. And that means that we have to understand the role that we have to play in the fight. And one of the roles is by raising our voices. We advocate for ourselves, as I said, but that kind of is the limit of what we're able to do. But the work that we have to do is turning inwards to cultivate pride, empowerment, education, and healing the wounds of the past. Because the reality is we're not going to be able to stop them doing what they want to do to us. And that's kind of a little frightening. And I think some people have said my book is a little frightening, but it's also like happy at the end. It has a happy ending. But it's really, it's not, we've done nothing wrong. I love being Jewish. It's not my fault that someone thinks that it's okay to message me gas kike. Like, I'm just a Glasgow Jew who, in all honesty, would much rather be talking about Britney Spears, hashtag free Britney. And, really, that's what I would want to do if I wasn't having to do this, because we do have to do this. But we have to recognize that this is a situation we're forced into. And I think that is fundamental, because that then shifts our perception of it, that we have been failed. We've not failed. And actually, even if we look at, I have a chapter in my book about acculturation and integration, and I of course talk about America, but I talk about France and Germany. And we can look at the German Jewish community as quite an extreme example of Jews who worked very hard to integrate and even assimilate. And then we obviously know what happened to them. But they did nothing wrong. That wasn't their fault. That was a fault of wider society, which forced them into a position that they felt they needed to integrate in such a way, and then ended up murdering them anyway. So we've done nothing wrong. And yes, we can look at individual examples of kind of bad Jews, but their existence doesn't justify anything, because there's bad people in every group. But we are treated especially callously, especially horrifically, and it's not our fault.
And sometimes it's hard to throw that off, right? The shame that builds up of not building in, and then the guilt that sometimes go along with it, because, well, you have to always be the one to say, listen, I need a few days off work. I don't get personal time off because it's a Jewish holiday. There's always that balance in the larger society. Not every company is as generous with their time off to observe religious holidays. And, many people don't live in jurisdictions where that's mandated. So, there's a built-in system to help bring about that kind of guilt and shame. And what am I doing to my coworkers if I have to take time off, and the resentments that come from that. Talk to me about your Holocaust education work. How did you get into that? And tell us a little bit about what you do with that.
Well, I'm basically a big history nerd. You can see the books behind me are all Jewish history. I just love history, and I always have. And I've always felt, my dad had me when he was 55. So his contemporary, I guess his pop stars were like Judy Garland and Ella Fitzgerald, which actually I was listening to Judy last night.
Well, it is gay. It's Pride Month.
True. And I love Judy. I'm a Judy stan. But I've always just loved history. I've always found it fascinating. I was obsessed with Mary Queen of Scots, obsessed with her, and obsessed with the fact that she was a real person. Her story, I'm not sure if any of you are familiar, and I won't be going into it because that's not the purpose of today's conversation, but she's kind of a wild figure. She's just absolutely, her life was insane, and she was real. And that's something that's always fascinated me about these kind of crazy events that happen to real individuals who are just like us. And being Jewish, there was not a time that I don't remember knowing about the Holocaust. It's just always been this shadow that's been hanging over us, especially, I was born in 87, so very much in the shadow of the Holocaust. We still had survivors in our community. And I just found it fascinating. And I love true crime. Whenever my partner and I are watching Netflix, I'm like, put on a murder. And I actually see the Holocaust and Jewish history at large with regards to anti-Jewish racism to be a little bit like a true crime. And all of these things, so whether it's the pogroms, whether it's the Farhud, the Inquisition, the Shoah, they're all evidence. They're all blood splatter. But the one thing we have to try to understand is the motive. Why? Why did they kill us? Why were 6 million Jews murdered in Europe and North Africa and Asia in the 20th century? And that is just a fascinating, horrible, terrible question. So my work, I started my own nonprofit in 2012, maybe nearly 10 years ago. And I worked on that in Scotland and the US for a few years. And I came out to Hong Kong to be the director of education for the Holocaust Center here. And then I moved on to kind of more formal teaching, but I teach a class every year on the Holocaust, a 3-month class. And we actually just finished it last week. And on the last day, I took our students to an Israeli restaurant. which is kind of an unorthodox way to end a class on the Holocaust. But I think so many of these classes focus so much on obviously, our destruction and what was done to us. And the facts that are ignored are like the fact that we're incredibly resilient and we built a state 3 years after this attempted destruction had finished. And we had, we're pretty remarkable actually as a people. And I wanted my students to understand that. And for me, Eve, who we spoke about briefly, Eve Barlow is another well-known advocate, and she's my best friend. And she would always say to me, Ben, stop going to Poland. Like, this cannot be good for you. Stop going to Poland. Stop doing these tours. You need to take a step back from this. And of course, she's right to an extent. You do have to give yourself space. But one thing that I found with the Holocaust is that I was less surprised at what is happening now than, say, my friends and my colleagues who were not as familiar with that period of history. Because my reasoning was, well, if they tried to do that once before, and we know that this form of hate didn't end after the Holocaust, at some point it will come back. So that recently has kind of been my way of thinking. And during the last 6 weeks, when we had this conflict, we saw this grassroots uprising. And it actually reminded me, and I, as a Holocaust educator, I'm very wary of Holocaust comparisons. Very, very wary. I think that 99% of them are inappropriate. But one thing that I noticed was that in 1933, when the Nazis came to power, there was this grassroots uprising. And there was anti-Semitism coming from music, academia, media, newspapers, all of these grassroots parts of society. It wasn't necessarily mandated by the government at this point. It came from the people. And they were rising up against what they were calling Jüdischer Geist, Jewish spirit. And what we've just experienced reminded me of that we had this grassroots uprising globally when the people were just waiting for an excuse, and they were coming at us. We were once again being framed as something we're not. But there was this, synagogues were attacked and Jews were attacked. The online experience was horrendous, and it was
and it happened down the street from our congregation in Los Angeles, and we were having Shavuot services, and the Palestinian protesters are screaming out in front of our synagogue. So we had an immediate experience of that, And
it's grassroots. It's not coming from government. And people say that's less dangerous, and maybe to some extent, but we're also seeing people in government who are espousing the same ideas, but it was grassroots. It came from the people. And I found that to be quite, terrifying, because one of my students said to me, they were like, do you think the Holocaust could happen again? And I said, no, but the only reason is because of Israel. We have a state now who will protect us. So if they start doing stuff to Jews in Europe, Israel will be in like a flash. And that is the only thing, honestly, it's the only thing I think that stands in our way of another destruction. And I know that this is not necessarily what you were all expecting for a conversation about pride, but Jewish pride is recognizing the reality and loving ourselves anyway. And saying, you guys can hate us as much as you want, hate us as much as you do. We're not going to stop loving ourselves. We're not going to stop growing and building and cultivating our community, because that is what we owe ourselves and our future.
So what are some steps to cultivating? Let's talk about cultivating pride. I love that notion. Talk to us about what steps ought we be doing to cultivate our pride.
So Jewish pride has to be rooted in action, I believe. So I'm atheist. If I even think about God, to be honest. Sorry, Rabbi. But probably actually, the things that someone who does believe in God and the things that say I do are very similar. My father passed away in 2017, and every year I say Kaddish for him on his yahrzeit. And that translation of Kaddish is exalting God's name. I'm not saying that to exalt God's name. I'm saying that because that is how Jews commemorate their dead. And that is how I want to commemorate my father and how he would have commemorated his. So I think it has to be rooted in something tangible. And this is something tangible. Jewish people coming together to have conversations, to talk about our identity, to talk about our community, attending synagogue, attending communal events, reading a book about Jewish history, saying Havdalah, lighting the Shabbat candles, eating challah, eating Jewish food, eating chicken soup or falafel or hummus or, any of the other incredible foods that we have in, you know, the vast diversity of our peoplehood. So I think it has to be something tangible. Because you mentioned something earlier, which is so true. Integrating is hard. And actually, specifically integrating as Jews is hard. And I've had some conversations recently about this accusation of Jew loyalty. And actually, I think to be Jewish is quite complicated because one of the whole points of Jewishness is the land. It's the reason that we were sustained in the diaspora. It's the reason that our connections to other diasporic communities were maintained, because we all still had this connection to our land. And now this land is a state, which makes it slightly more complicated. But I do think that we have to, you know, be Zionist. I think that Zionism is a fundamental Jewish, it's not even a fundamental Jewish idea. It is Jewishness. And of course, that doesn't mean supporting everything the government does, because I didn't vote for the government, so they don't really represent me. But the land, the existence of a Jewish state, I think is incredibly important. And it being something that's real and tangible and that we can be cognizant of. Because when, you know, I wear a kippah every day. Yeah, shakshuka, someone said shakshuka, it's the best. I wear a kippah every day. And if I didn't, people in Hong Kong are not necessarily kind of as attuned to Jewishness and Jewish symbols. But in the UK, let's say, I take off my kippah. I know that I just look like a regular white guy. But with the minute I put my kippah on, I'm marking myself as a Jew, but marking myself as a Jew proudly. I want the world to know that I'm a Jew. I want the world to know that I'm proud of who I am, and I'm not going to hide it. And of course, physical safety is paramount. We're not going to tell people to do things which kind of may lead to them being physically unsafe, which is why I told my mother to maybe put away her Magen David. But it has to be something real and tangible. So whether it's engaging in Jewish education, listening to Jewish music, eating Jewish food, engaging in Jewish religious practices in whatever way people see fit, that is how we cultivate pride. And most importantly, events like these where we talk about it. What does it mean to be a Jew? You know, we have that, as I said, the old adage, 3 Jews, 15 opinions. That is going to probably become amplified when we talk about our identities. And of course, we want diversity. We want to celebrate the multitude of our experiences, but we also have to understand who we are as a core, which is why I reject anti-Zionism as a Jewish position. I don't think they're compatible. And I also think that if we have Jewish anti-Zionist movements form, I think in a couple of generations, they will no longer be Jews. And that's not to say we're not talking about excommunicating. We're not talking about stripping people's Jewishness. We're talking about, though, you can only change something so much before it just becomes something else entirely. So we need to guard against that. We need to guard against internalized anti-Jewish racism. We have to have conversations about the difficulty of integration and give space to ourselves. And most importantly, in whatever way you see fit, express, embody, and love your Jewishness. Because it really is. I mean, we are remarkable. Telling my students, it's like, yeah, we originated in the Levant 5,000 years ago, or 4,000 years ago, and I'm a Jew in Hong Kong teaching you about Jewish history, and then we're eating Jewish food together. It's really awesome, and awesome in the true sense of the word, not, you know, the millennial awesome, but like really it is awe-inspiring.
That's great. Talk to me a little bit about you talked about joining Twitter and engaging in kind of the anti-Corbynite movement, but you're very active on Twitter, and I don't know if people will follow you there, but talk to us a little bit about that experience of being a social media influencer and engaging in some of these conversations online. Why do you do it, and what's in it for you?
Such a good question. I do it because I think I have a responsibility to do it. Because actually, Jewishness is not about me. And actually, Jewishness doesn't belong to me. I don't think it belongs to any of us. We are caretakers of it for the next generation. And we have to fight. We have to cultivate our practice. We have to educate, but we have to fight back. And as a teacher, you know, I literally am a teacher. Some people call themselves educators. I'm a bit salty about that because I'm an actual educator. I have a certificate and everything. I'm particularly good at explaining complex concepts in a more simplified, accessible way. That's just by very nature of my job. That's what I do every day. I stand up and I talk to my students about, you know, difficult aspects of history. with the aim, obviously, that they understand them. So I felt like I had in all honesty, not a special skill, but a skill that could be utilized in this fight and in helping people understand. And there's many, many things that I'm terrible at. I cannot count. I got 4% in a physics test once. Like, my skill is very much history and only history. You know, you put me in another thing and it's like, I'm like, what? But this is something I seem to just understand. And I think it's probably because of my training historically and understanding Mary Queen of Scots and Jewish history and other things. But I wanted to be someone that people could trust, be someone that could help people learn and understand, and not just be commentating. You know, there's a lot of people online who commentate, and they're who comment, and they're very important. But for me, I want to help people have framework to understand their experience. So for example, again, another Harry Potter reference, I used the Boggart, which was a magical creature we meet in book 3, to help explain the role that Jews play in society. No one knows what the Boggart looks like. It takes the shape of whatever the person looking at it fears most. So for Rabbi, it might be snakes. For me, it might be spiders. No one knows what it actually looks like. And that is the role that Jews play in society. We're white, we're not white. We're capitalists, we're communists. We're foreigners, we're the 1%. We're blah, 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 blah. You know, it goes on and on and on. So that's what I wanted to do because I find it fascinating. And saying that, it comes at a huge cost. You know, it's exhausting. I'm actually now on a social media break, like kind of self-imposed, but also an intervention from some friends and my partner, because it's really exhausting and it's hard to be receiving messages every day that are really horrendous. And leading, which is what social media allows us to do, is also a challenge, and you have to restore yourself. So it doesn't come without its challenges, but it's also given me a community. I live in Hong Kong. My partner isn't Jewish. I go to a shul here, but you know, my mother would like me to go more, I'm sure. I work in a non-Jewish environment. Yes, I teach Jewish subjects or subjects about Jews, but it's still in a non-Jewish environment. So these events and Twitter and Instagram have been also a lifeline for me to make me feel part of this Am Echad, you know, one global people, which is really what I believe we are. So it's both incredibly gratifying and it's wonderful and empowering and inspiring, but it's also incredibly challenging. And also just the apps themselves, they're addictive. So that's also part of it, right? Like, you're using this very addictive platform, and then the conversations themselves can be addictive. So you have to be very, very controlled about how you use it. But I've sold quite a few number of my books, and I wouldn't have been able to do that without social media. They would have been like, who is that Scottish Jew? Like, who is he? You know, there's like 4 of us.
Well, tell me, we're going to open it up and allow people, if you have questions, to be able to actually to talk to Ben. You know, we're coming to the last days of Gay Pride Month, June around the world. You mentioned Judy Garland, of course. You know, she died in June, and part of the connection to Stonewall is, you know, folks were mourning her death and you know, didn't want to get harassed anymore and fought back. Can you talk a little bit more about the LGBTQ aspects of your book and what we should take away from our multiplicity of identities?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, the book would not have been possible if I hadn't already been through an LGBTQ plus pride experience. And I really don't think a heterosexual Jew could have written this book, in all honesty, because it really is drawn from my experience. And I learned the lessons of LGBTQ plus pride. So things perhaps that we have done really well, things that we've done maybe less well. So, you know, people talk about a lack of diversity in our community a lot with regards to the LGBTQ plus community. So when writing this book, I thought, okay, we need not to repeat those mistakes. Let's have Jews from all over the world featured. Let's tell a variety of Jewish stories that were really representing kind of a diversity of Jewish life, because we are diverse. But yeah, it wouldn't have been possible without it. So yeah, when all the Orthodox Jews, and I've got to say a lot of Orthodox Jews have read it and are using it, like I think the British Orthodox chaplaincy is using it. And that's really amazing, because they're also at the same time learning about LGBTQ plus Jews, specifically me, some other people in the book, trans Jews, but also understanding how these identities are one. People always want you to sever your kind of like intersection identity. So you're gay over here and you're Jewish over here, or whatever it is. But no, it's over here. I'm gay and Jewish. Like, and you cannot separate them. So I'm not going to go to an LGBTQ plus space that's anti-Jewish just because it's LGBTQ plus. And I'm not going to also be around Jews that are anti-LGBTQ plus just because I'm Jewish. I have to be one because I am one. So the book wouldn't have been possible without that. And one of the ways I found my oneness was pride, being like, wow, it's so incredible that there's these connections. And then in my research, I found all of the amazing Jews who have contributed to the LGBTQ plus movement. You know, Magnus Hirschfeld in Germany is considered the first modern LGBTQ plus rights activist. There's obviously Harvey Milk, Anne Cronenberg, Roberta Kaplan, yourself. You know, there's amazing people who have stood and fought for the LGBTQ plus community who are also proud Jews. And that's just so remarkable because we don't get to choose. We are one. And people are trying to sever, you know, there's now this kind of mantra, there's no Zionist at Pride. Well, you know, if I wasn't on a professional call, I would probably use a very rude expletive here, but it's unacceptable. They can't say these things because we are Zionist and we are LGBTQ plus, and we will go to Pride, whether these racist losers like it or not. We're not going to sever. We're not going to choose because we can't. Because we know firsthand what happens when you try to suppress a part of you. You know, it's why LGBTQ plus youth are 4 times more likely to attempt suicide. We're not going to allow that to be imposed on us as adults. So again, it's one more rejection of disgusting racism. But the book is an expression of my gayness as much as it is my Jewishness, I think.
Well, we are richer for it. Your book is beautifully written. If you all haven't read his book, I really want to commend it to you. And it's available here on Amazon, Jewish Pride, Rebuilding the Jewish People by Ben Freeman. Ben, it's really a beautiful history lesson and also encouraging us, I think, to really speak with a strong, proud voice. I want to give a few moments if there's somebody that has a question in the, that would like to ask Ben. There's some in the chats here. I'm going to just review quickly. Richard Frank says, in the LGBT community, we have a conversation about internalized homophobia. I think we need to have conversation about internalized anti-Semitism in the Jewish community.
I can tell you now that is going to be the topic of my second book.
Okay, Richard, you're away. There you go.
Because you're absolutely right. And it's mad because there are Jews who say it doesn't exist. And as LGBTQ plus people, we're like, what are you talking about? Of course it exists. And you see it in so many ways. And often we talk about it with regards to the anti-Zionist Jews, or rather I do. But that's actually quite an extreme example. But there's also this suppressing of our Jewishness, or trying to make ourselves acceptable to the non-Jewish world. You know, just like in the LGBTQ plus community, I have friends who are obsessed with having masculine physiques, who are obsessed, does my voice sound too gay? Am I walking gay? All of these things are expressions of internalized homophobia. And they absolutely exist in, you know, specific ways in the Jewish community, just as they also exist in the Black community. There's a huge amount of very important academic research done by Black academics about that experience. So we have to talk about it. So that is my second book. And actually my third book I'm turning this into a trilogy, is going to be about acculturation and the difficulty of integration, because it isn't easy and we don't talk about that. So as you say, what do you do when you want to have time off, but you don't want to rock the boat? Actually, you're not rocking the boat, it's your right. But we don't see it that way.
Right. Doug Hirsch asked a really powerful question. How do we convince regional Jewish community to get anti-shaming onto the curriculum of every local synagogue's religious school? You know, you spoke a lot about this issue of shaming, and so tell us a little bit more, Ben.
It's a really great question, and I wish I had a very easy answer, but it's not easy because we're fighting through so many layers of BS, basically. But I think really what we have to do is not stop talking about it, is having these conversations. And, you know, if each of us have a conversation about Jewish pride to our kind of networks, then this idea spreads. And at one point, they'll have to get on board. If enough of us are talking about it, and if enough of us are advocating for it, and the Jewish press and the Jewish influencers and the Jewish, you know, advocates are talking about it, they'll have to get on board. But it isn't, you know, it's complex. There are Jewish schools who will not touch my book because I'm LGBTQ+, which is really tragic. But also there's part of me which is, you know, a little evil. And I'm like, okay, just wait till everyone is talking about it. And then you have to, because that is what's going to happen. It's not just about my book, it's about a movement that we're building. And empowering people means that you're unstoppable. If we love ourselves and if we believe in ourselves and if we believe in cultivating Jewish pride and Jewishness and educating about what it means to be a Jew, then we're unstoppable. And not in, you know, an anti-Jewish like world conspiracy way, but in a self-love kind of way.
Beautiful. Larry Levi asked a really great question. How can we be more mindful about teaching our children about the Holocaust in a way that minimizes the trauma the past that is passed on? Is that even possible or desirable?
It's such a great question. And I had a situation in Hong Kong in December. My partner and I were getting pizza, and we were on a slope, and there were people drinking, and some people had their masks off, and the Hong Kong police, they taped off the top of the street, and they started marching down with megaphones, and then they taped off the bottom of the street. And I had a physical reaction. It was not just like an unease with the police. This was like fight or flight. And I said to my partner, who isn't Jewish, I was like, I have to go. My heart rate was rising, my palms were sweaty. And that is something that's intergenerational trauma. And it is something that many of us experience in many different circumstances. So I'm not sure that we can minimize it, but what we can do is address it by recognizing that it exists, by recognizing that these are things which affect us, even if they're not our personal experiences. I think that's so important. And I think that what we have to do, especially when we're talking to Jewish students as well, simultaneously talking about the realities of the past and the current and the present, but also celebrating us. What were these communities doing? What were the, you know, what was the community in Iraq doing before the Farhud? What was the community in Thessaloniki doing with Ladino before they were deported? What were the Polish Jews doing? These Jews were living Jewish lives, and they were cultivating Jewishness, and they were just living, but in a way which was celebrating and promoting their rich culture. So we have to discuss that. Discussing us only as victims is what leads to these issues, I think. It's like you're starting to see this now with other issues. People are starting to stop using the word slaves and start using the word enslaved people, which is of course much more accurate. So I think we have to say, you know, we are not victims. We have been victimized, but we're not victims. We are resilient and we are survivors. And I think that is the way we kind of mitigate this intergenerational trauma. But I do think it's always going to be there. Realizing when you're a kid, oh my God, in living memory, people try to destroy us. That's traumatizing. But all we can do, again, we have to remember it's not our fault. But what we can do is create a space where Jewish people feel that we can process, that we can talk about it, and that we can celebrate, you know, what was done to us. Again, it wasn't our fault, obviously.
Well, this is wonderful. A couple people asked if they can, where can they follow you on Facebook or Twitter?
You can follow me on Twitter at Ben M. Freeman, on Instagram at Ben M. Freeman. I have Facebook. I think it's also at Ben M. Freeman, but I have said I'm much less active on Facebook, so mostly on Twitter and Instagram. And I also have a website, which is www.benmfreeman.com, so you can email me there and you can be added to my mailing list. Because what we're really trying to do is build a movement. You know, my book hopefully is going to kickstart this, but it's not about me, it's about all of us, and it's about the future. We're trying to build something which is sustainable and multi-generational and is going to change the face of the Jewish world.
Well, Ben, I believe that the Jewish future is in good hands with you helping to shape a beautiful future of strength and pride and education. And I hope that all of you will follow Ben and get his book if you haven't read it. It's great reading, inspiring reading, and we can't wait to read number 2 and number 3 of your trilogy. We'll be looking forward to it. Want to thank everybody for being with us today. Ben's website's in the chat as well, and hope you might consider a donation to Congregation Kol Ami so we can continue to bring you amazing and great programs like these at no cost online. Ben, we'll look forward to having you back, and maybe even in person at some point as well. Thank you all for spending a Sunday with us at Congregation Kol Ami. We wish you all a wonderful Sunday. Thank you so much for being with us. Thank you again, Ben.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone.